Welcome to the Australian Business Executive Podcast, where we speak with Australia's most influential industry professionals on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all our content, including our magazines, podcasts and videos by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.
Managing Director of the family business Oceanias Quality Tours, Chris Oceanias is extremely passionate about quality group travel experiences both in Australia and overseas. His family's involvement in the bus and coach industry began back in 1967 when his father Laurie established a school bus run in Victoria's Wimmera region. Many years later, the family moved to the Mornington Peninsula and developed a coach tour company specializing in extended accommodated tours across Australia. So how did it start off? Because you're a second generation owner. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Laurie and Margaret, so that's my dad and stepmum. They had buses down on the Mornington Peninsula in the early 80s. And they were busy doing charter and school runs and so on. But they also had a passion for outback Australia. They often holidayed up to Alice Springs in Central Australia. And they'd always come home and tell us all about their experiences, and they always wanted to share that with other people. And this particular time in the early 80s, Laurie and Margaret decided that they'd actually take family and friends up to Alice Springs and do a little one-off tour, which would be great. Now, that all went ahead, and it was great fun, and we all had a terrific time. But what actually happened was that the people that had travelled on that one-off tour came home and told everyone about it. And just due to demand and people finding out about this particular tour, Laurie and Margaret then, the next year, for example, did another 2 tours to the same area. And then the following year, still due to word of mouth, there was 3 tours, and the next year there was 4 tours, and so on. So it actually started just by accident, really.
Yeah, so what were they doing at the time? I mean, how do they... It's really interesting, most people spend a lot of time formatting, considering how they're going to start up a business, but this sounds completely accidental.
Well, yes, you're right. It was accidental. And those people also that had travelled on those initial tours, which were just to Central Australia, then would say to Laurie and Margaret, we really enjoyed that trip. We'd love to see other parts of Australia. You should do some tours to other areas. Would you take us to Darwin? And we'd love to go to Queensland. And so by this stage, after a few years, Laurie and Margaret sort of thought, well, this could have longevity. There's could be something in this. The people really enjoy the tours with us. And so that's when they decided, okay, we're going to have a real go at this and create Oceanias tours. And then they started to do their research and find more destinations to travel to and set off in the car and travel around Australia to make up the itineraries and then come home and market the material.
So, growing up, were you ended up taking over the business, but were you involved in it growing up as part of this?
Well, yes, because when I was young, Dad also had buses, and so I was always interested in the business and in the bus travel. By the time Laurie and Margaret had decided to start to do some tours even to Alice Springs, I was at the stage where I'd just finished my schooling, and so I was able to come along and, I loved driving the buses, and so I could do that. And then I started to learn the tours from Laurie and Margaret. And then as time went by, over the coming years, through the late 80s and through the 90s, Laurie and Margaret started to do less tours, and I sort of continued on doing more tours through to the extent where by the end of 1997, Laurie and Margaret had pretty much retired from the tour business, and my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, Bernadette, and I were able to continue the business on.
Interesting. Okay. So obviously it's grown, it's expanded between, I guess it's where it initially started from. So what sort of tours are you guys offering these days?
Well, yes. Well, these days our tours range from about 4 days in duration right through to 25 days. We offer tours all over Australia, and also these days quite a few international tours. I think the variety of tours that we offer suits a large demographic, and the tours are right throughout the year. So in the autumn and the spring, or in the southern parts of Australia where we get the nice weather, and then of course at this time of the year up in the winter, all of our tours are generally north of the Tropic of Capricorn, so up through Queensland and the top end and Western Australia.
So is that pretty common then? Well, I guess you're a little bit southern compared to where I am in New South Wales, but are a lot of people looking to escape winter a lot of the time?
Yes, fortunately they are. So that's exactly what happens. However, we do also have some more local Christmas in July tours, which are always really popular. But generally speaking, our coach crew and our coaches are north of Australia through this time of the year, and start to return south in the spring. And, of course, spring's a fantastic time with the wildflowers and the gardens and so on through the southern parts of Australia as well.
Excellent. I think originally, when we originally spoke, you said that you guys are doing about 100 tours a year now, which sounds like it's quite busy. Where do you guys put your market position? Do you consider yourself high-end, affordable, sort of medium?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to our service, the service that we provide, that's certainly high end, and I'd say second to none. As far as our cost base, we're probably medium as far as in the middle of the market. But what we try to do is to keep the price affordable, and but also add amazing service.
Right. Okay. I remember you had told me that you guys were award-winning or won an award recently. I mean, tourism's a pretty competitive sector. Where do you guys think that your difference is, and why do you think people choose Oceanias?
Yes, well, over the years we have won quite a few Australian Achiever Awards in particular, and in fact we just picked up that award again this year. I think our customer service is a really important part of why people like to come with us. Our folks know that when our chauffeur picks them up from their home to start the tour, right through to when our chauffeur drops them home again after the tour, they know that everything's included throughout their time away, and that they'll be really well looked after. So they know that when they come with us, they'll be treated like a member of the family. Everyone becomes a family unit on the tour.
Okay, it's a multi-generational family business now. How do you think things have changed over the years from when you were originally just driving the bus part-time for your parents?
For sure, yes. Well, things certainly have changed over that time. For example, back in those early days, a lot more of the places we would travel, the roads were rough and unsealed, and such as the road up to Alice Springs, as well as that there's a lot less accommodation places around Australia. And in fact, tourism in Australia was still quite young. There was a lot of Australia that hadn't been explored by groups and so on at that stage. So from back then, a lot's changed. I mean, back at that time, there were roads and so on around Australia weren't as good. There was a lot less accommodation. We were much more limited with the places we could visit. Of course, these days there's a lot more competition. So we're always needing to vary our tours and change the tours and the places that we travel to. With the internet, that's also brought about a lot more, a wealth of information for people and choices that they're aware of all of the time. So it's very important for us to stay in touch with our customers, using both the internet and still the traditional printed material to make sure that they can find us these days.
Okay. Is there anything going on with the tourism industry in general that you can share with us?
Well, I think the tourism industry is pretty steady at the moment, particularly with the domestic touring. There's a lot of retired senior age people travelling, and they're the ones that have the time to do that. With that, though, is low interest rates, which they have been low for a long time, but especially low, of course, now. And that can impact on people's, especially retired folk, on their discretionary spending. So I guess that's not so helpful. On the other hand, we have the baby boomers entering sort of that age bracket now, which is also a benefit. So, and I think those people will be very eager to travel.
Okay. And I mean, as we begin to wrap up, where do you see Oceanias' quality tours headed into the future?
Well, I think there'll always be a demand for domestic and overseas travel in the retired senior market age group. Ultimately, I'd like to see some of my children continue in the business and take it forward in long term. Short term, one of the things we've noticed more recently is that people tending to enjoy or prefer smaller group travel rather than the larger groups. So we're now offering quite a lot of small group departures with, say, a maximum of only 20 people. I guess it means that it's more intimate for those for the group, and they can still enjoy the benefits of being a group and having other people to share the experience with, without the higher numbers. So.
Okay. So, I mean, before we wrap up today, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Group travelling is it's a great way to make new friends, and of course they have the safety of group travel. It's also great for single travellers as well, because they can still share the experience with other people and not be on their own.
Ah, excellent. Well, Chris, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Jess.
This has been a production of the Australian Business Executive, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Australian Business Executive, including our magazines, podcasts and videos, by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.